I'm Sarah Grace McCandless, and this is OnBrand, where we take a look at brands through the lens of the consumer and this desire to create, maintain, and cultivate true connection and relationship. Today's show, I am thrilled to be bringing you this guest representing an industry that I actually have a little history in as well. And it's an area that I really feel is where the origin of brand advocacy really began. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But first, I want to introduce you to today's guest. Welcome to OnBrand, Jann Jones, who is the manager of brand development and publishing operations for Legendary Comics. Jann, welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. It's great to see your face.
Oh, it's so great to see your face too. I wish it were in person. So, Jann, why don't we start first? So you work with Legendary Comics in the comics industry, and it's an area that you've worked in for quite some time. It's a really fascinating industry. Why don't we talk a little bit about your specific role to kind of set the stage with Legendary Comics?
Absolutely. So I am, as said, the manager of brand development and pub ops. I keep the trains running. I make sure people get paid, but that is just a small part of the job. It's also really establishing us as a brand in the comics industry. We have been around for a while, and this is our latest incarnation. And, we jokingly, lovingly call it Legendary 2.0. And it's really getting the message out about who we are and what we stand for and what we have to contribute to the publishing space. And it's getting that message out. And that is currently what's taking up a lot of my days.
Yeah, and it's a space too. I mean, there are some juggernauts in this space that have been around for some time, and then there are a lot of other publishers who are out there who've kind of come to the table. What is that message for Legendary Comics? What is that kind of brand overview, mission, and vision that you're working to get to the space?
I think it is, when we first started, we were a very, I like to say, bro action-oriented publisher. It was very reflective of who was in charge. It was, all male. And, when my boss, Robert Napton, was given the department 2 years ago, he brought on myself and our editor, Nikita Kanakante. And I joke, we are the most diverse team in comics. We want to put out books that reflect who we are. We do get to play in the licensed space and support our franchises, but we also have a really exciting opportunity to bring marginalized and POC and LGBTQ creators to the forefront to tell compelling, unique, character-driven stories. And, there is a lot of that, but there needs to be more, and that's really important. So that is what we're trying to do, inclusive storytelling, authentic storytelling. That is where we want to focus.
It sounds to me a little bit like the brand itself is very much defined by the stories that you are trying to tell. Would you say that that's accurate?
I think it is. And I think, we try to be more focused. I think in the beginning it was very male dominated, very action oriented. And, I think seeing the shift in the market and seeing, who we are, we want that to be reflected. And there's so much white space in that category. And it's a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned this, and you and I know this firsthand, right? Mm-hmm. Because I used to work in this industry and you've been in it for a long time. There are some, I guess, some misconceptions and some assumptions made of, first of all, what types of stories are being told in comics. You really just shattered that with what you just told us and some really innovative moves, right? And then also who these are for. So I'm curious how you would describe what does that look like today? What does a comics or graphic novel reader look like? And how are these stories shifting and evolving from maybe the superhero genre, which has a space and a need, but is not the only story to be told, right?
Right. And I think that there are really two buckets. And, there is the, action science, action superhero space, which is predominantly male, tending to be older now. They're aging up and they're not adding fans as much. But there is a very hungry, YA middle grade reader market that is hungry for this content. And they read, they buy, they support, and they want to see stories that reflect who they are. And so it's really exciting. When I first got into it, when we first got into it, there wasn't this space for it. And we've just seen it. I think manga has been a big influence. I think, literary has been a big influence. But I think we're going to see the shift into these. I mean, I think we're already seeing it with books like Raymond Telgemeier's books and Dog Boy and Wimpy Kid. We're already seeing that shift, and we're already seeing like large NYT, best-selling titles, skyrocket in numbers that the superhero genre can only dream about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, and it gives me this idea that we should probably pause, because you and I we can talk inside baseball on this all the time, right? Right. Like when I'm talking to different guests for this show, and really the heartbeat of the show is about connection. And I talk about, I look for these stories where I can talk about companies and brands and how they're really putting connection at the forefront, or what does connection look like and mean? When I think about your industry, there's kind of three pillars here. There's the connection that you make with the creators you're working with. So artists, writers. Then there's the connection that you make with where these books and stories are coming out. So you have a direct market, which is, for those who aren't familiar with that term, is more of kind of a comic shop, brick and mortar. And then you have like your book market as well, and some digital channels now too. And then you have the readers, right? The fans. So three things to think about here. What are some key considerations, either to some of these or all of these or each of these? And do you think that that's changed in recent years, especially with COVID?
I think it's changed depending on who you are and who you want to reach out to. For us, getting into that direct market space isn't really, we're fighting for scraps. Like 85% of every dollar that gets spent goes to the big two, Marvel and DC. So at the end of the day, that investment for us, we love them and it's important, but there's only so much headway we can make. So we really want to connect with the book sales market. And then another key thing is libraries and educators. They are an untapped. They support these books and they can make a huge difference in how a book performs. And the fans, and we want to have an authentic communication with these fans. We have been these fans. We are these fans, and for me, it's about growing up and not seeing my face represented in what media was, and having this opportunity to help change that is so big and it's so important. And we're really excited about that.
And you've been in the industry, you've been with some of the kind of the Davids and the Goliaths too. Do you think that you're at an advantage now, particularly with Legendary, and also kind of just where we are in society of being willing to maybe embrace and even looking for these different stories?
Absolutely. I think, Legendary, we're small but mighty. We do, 10 to 12 titles a year is our goal. Half of those are licensed and half of those are original IP. And we have a real opportunity there. And, to tell these stories, we aren't, when you deal with licensed characters, sometimes you can be restricted by those. And it's actually great to see that is changing. We're seeing a big shift in that with Marvel and with DC, and even in branches like Star Wars. They have, LGBTQ characters now, and they're including pronouns. And, that's really exciting to see.
Yeah. And, you talked a little bit too about kind of the shift in some of these channels and priorities. Let's talk a little bit, where does digital play from a publishing standpoint, from getting these stories? And then I'll ask you about how it plays in terms of connecting with your readers and your fans. But let's start with the publishing side and maybe share with our listeners, what are the options now in that space? What does that look like? And how is Legendary participating?
Sure. So for the digital space, it has been for comics traditionally, it's very much like a push pull, and it's hard because for digital to truly be embraced, we would need to lower those prices, and then by doing that, we would end up destroying the direct market, which is your comic book retailers and your small sellers, and who have supported the industry since its creation. And nobody wants to do that. So everyone's just kind of waiting and holding their breath. But there are platforms. There's Comixology to do that. We see, we keep taking meetings with these companies who tell us that they are going to be the Spotify of the digital comedy, for comics. No one has taken off yet. No one has fully embraced the platform. I think there's a few steps still. I think we need to consider price. I think in some ways we need to change the way we tell the stories, and accessibility. I think you'll see the rise of, some of the platforms like Webtoon and Tapas who bring, free and sometimes paid content. It's an exciting space to watch. And, I think COVID has changed some of this as well. The stores not being open, in the first few months of the pandemic, new books weren't coming out. Legendary had shifted from a floppy, which is your 22-page comic that you're used to seeing, to a graphic novel format because floppies weren't performing for us. And the companies that did rely on that business took a big hit because there wasn't the accessibility. And we could talk all day about distribution, but I think this is going to be some very interesting few years. And I think, like any industry, the retailers who adapt and who are reading the room will survive and thrive. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but there's going to be some growing pains.
You mentioned kind of the floppy, the single issue kind of, and it really made me think about how we've moved, how we kind of consume story, right? So instead of like it's issue 1 of 8, and eventually will be collected into a trade paperback or graphic novel, maybe it's all coming out at once. And it makes me think of things like a new season of, Gambit or something like that, where I can kind of get to all of it. I can take it 1 week at a time if I want to or not. Do you think that that's benefited the comics industry, is that we're seeing these adaptations to behaviors in other areas of entertainment as well?
I think it depends on the market. I think the older superhero audience is having a harder time with it. The younger audience loves it. Like the readership on Webtoons, if you take a look at, and Webtoons is a free digital platform, they release books on their chapters, on a weekly basis. Some have like 2 or 3 drops a week, some have 1. And the readership is in the hundreds of thousands. Wow. And this would not be attainable in the direct market, and it wouldn't be sustainable in the direct market, but they're thriving because they're teaching people how to read it in a new way. It's available on your phone or your digital device, not in print at all. And so I think we'll see different shifts depending on what you like, because we have, companies have tried to take, Marvel stories or DC to a platform like Webtoons, and it hasn't translated. So it's interesting.
Do you think that the growth of digital is helping in terms of discovery with a lot of your stories? And then ultimately, is there a kind of proxy connection play there too, connecting with new readers that maybe you wouldn't have necessarily gotten in front of if you were just relying on in-store experience?
Oh, absolutely. I think it has opened the door not only to new stories, but new creators and new talent. You have people who, some of the best titles, the best read titles are just like a slice of life about a girl and her cat and her boyfriend, that never would have found an audience in the comic book market, but here she has a voice and a huge platform. And so it's really great to see. I think it's breaking down a lot of the barriers. It's, leveling the playing field somewhat. So it's great. It's so great to see this because I think in times past, they would not have had those opportunities.
Yeah, and that makes me think too, I'm thinking about shifting from in-person experiences to digital. And one of the cornerstones of the comics market, of course, is the convention scene and circuit. You and I have seen that evolve so drastically over the years. So different, right? For those who don't know, I was marketing director at Dark Horse Comics for several years, and so I was the one running the booth at these shows, and it was a big part of this industry. It still is, and what we saw was it became less about the comic convention and more about like entertainment con, right? We had all these studios coming in and networks and celebrities, a lot of people trying to get their project in front of this audience. Before we talk about where that's gone, why, like that, again, this kind of gets to the root of this. I think this is sort of the origin of a brand advocate, if you will. The fandom in comics is unprecedented. Why do you think that is? And why do you think others started to try to tap into it as well?
I think it's people who are really dedicated. And, I think in male spaces, it can be kind of hard to find your, so-called tribe or your family. Women, we have, crafts and cooking and stuff. And for males, it can be a little bit harder to form those bonds. But if you have someone like, dude, did you read, the latest issue of Spider-Man? So much about what made the comic book stores so awesome was the sense of community. You would go in on new book day and you would, know your clerks. They could make suggestions. You would see other people. It was a social platform before there were social platforms. Mm-hmm. And, the dedication, fandom was a little less toxic at that point. I think, having the rise of social media has given people a voice. And I think sometimes they discover that they get more attention with, anger than they do with happiness. So it's just been really interesting. I think that it was a sense of community though, and it was a sense of ownership and investment. And, once brands saw this, it was like, oh my, we have this whole untapped market. And now, we look at the rise of the geek when, 15 years ago, if you went out wearing, a comic book shirt, you would get made fun of. And now we have whole companies who are just like letting your geek flag fly, and they're making money.
And do you think that's more inclusive now too? Do you think that shifted from maybe being very focused towards a male audience? And is Legendary, how's Legendary playing a role in that as well?
I think Legendary, we will be playing a bigger role in the upcoming years. Like, books take a while to come out. We're working 2 years on titles, but I think we will have a voice in that space. But I do think it has contributed to opening up the market to different people and different fans and the acceptance of different fans. I remember being at a convention in the early 2000s, and someone came up to me and said, things were a lot easier before you guys got involved. And it was a man talking about before women got involved in comics. And it was like, really, dude? And now, I mean, that is, those ceilings are falling and they're being shattered and those doors are breaking down. And as we see that happen, we'll see the interest and the reach just expand.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, again, we both speak from experience. And when I was in the industry, you and I were like, 2 of 10, what felt like 10 women at the time. Yeah. It probably not accurate, but it felt like it at the time. So it's nice to see that shift. And when you speak about Legendary Comics and the types of stories that you're telling, again, I just feel like these are not the things that one might assume or expect from a comics or graphic novel world. Going back to the convention scene, obviously it's been a very different year. And one of the things I think that we knew about the convention scene, whether it was Comic-Con in San Diego or, New York Comic-Con, Emerald City in Seattle, WonderCon, right? People were coming to that more and more in person. There was a buzz, a feeling there, and people were very vocal about their experiences. We didn't have that this year. I think it might've been the first year that Comic-Con was ever canceled in maybe the history of the show. How did you pivot? Tell me a little bit about that experience and what you learned from it as well.
For us, it's been great. I mean, it's going to sound terrible, but we had a real opportunity. A normal Legendary panel will draw, anywhere from 50 to, a few hundred people, depending on what we talk about. We have Monsterverse, which is Godzilla and Kong. And we did an online panel in March to talk about this. And it was, or in May, and the organic reach on it was, our reach on YouTube was about 12,000 views. But the organic reach of people making their own content and their own videos was, 100,000+, mentions. And that is huge. That is attention that we never would have gotten had we not been in lockdown. We've really been able to pivot and invest in our online presence for these conventions. We have an opportunity and we're really taking advantage of it. I hear a lot of the Hall H, which would be like your Disney and your Marvel and your DC. They're really disappointed in how conventions are turning out because their reach has been kneecapped, while ours is just like, and we've just increased our reach by, thousands of percents. And it's really nice.
Yeah. I mean, again, for those who've never maybe, seen reports of these different conventions, they're, part of the experience though, there's a lot of waiting. And there is there's limited capacity in some of these rooms too. So there's a buzz that you get from being like an energy, but you've just described this advantage. You're able to reach more people and people who may not have even been able to go. Sometimes it's very hard to get tickets to these things. People buy them year in advance. So do you think that that's something that will stay beyond kind of this lockdown situation that we're in now? And when things start to lift, what do you think will remain and what's the benefit of that?
I think when things lift, we're going to see a really big shift in convention strategy. Disney and Warner Brothers have both proven that they don't need the big conventions to make a splash with Celebration, D23. They are able to dominate the news cycle alone with whatever announcements are showing. DC did Fandom this year and released a whole bunch of exclusive content, and they don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a booth and giveaways. They can just do that and have it all be about them. I think for us going into that, the YouTube space, we've launched our social platforms this year. We are really making the most of it. We're taking these learnings of, what we've done and what we've, resulted, and we're going to apply those to the future. Yes, the world will open up again, but I don't know, economy, crowds. It's going to be a year or two before conventions are really back in the swing of things and we're comfortable attending. So we're just going to make the most of it.
Well, and you've just kind of teed up a great segue there, because I wanted to ask you about social. You mentioned YouTube and kind of really launching into more of leveraging social. So I'm curious, how do you use that at Legendary? What are the types of interactions and engagements that you have? Are you seeing representation at sort of all stages? Like when I think about sort of a customer journey, it's like who are you? I'm checking you out and kind of getting to know you, to becoming, in this case, a reader or a fan or a consumer, and then staying with you, talking about you, telling everybody how great you are. So what are you seeing on that spectrum in terms of your social engagements? I know that I think you're behind that, aren't you?
Yes. So, I have launched the social channels. I have some help from our wonderful social media person, Robbie McClure over at Legendary. He works with me. But we've, really been building these social, Twitter and Insta were launched this year. Facebook we had, but we didn't really curate it in a way that made sense. And there's a real opportunity for us, especially for the original slate of books. We get a lot of people in the door with our Monsterverse and our Pacific Rim and our other things. My goal is to get them in the door with that and then show them that we do other things and, really have them be interested. And maybe it's not for them, but maybe they know someone, they have a little sister, they have a girlfriend, they have, a cousin who would be interested. And it's a lot of work, but it's really fun because it's the one space where I really get to inject a lot of my personality into. I don't want this to just, be, 10 social posts a day of just like, bye. Like I want to engage with people. I want to make them think. I want to make them, occasionally look at my cat. Those cat posts get a lot of engagement. But yeah, it really is about developing that voice and that friendly voice that, is a little irreverent and a little bit playful and sarcastic, but also like, you trust. And so, it's been really fun.
It's really interesting the way you describe that, though, too, because a lot of brands have sort of these pillars that define them, right? 2 to 3 words or sort of flagship things. And the way that you described it really ladders back to how you described the brand in the beginning. When you talk about the stories that you're telling, that it's reflecting who your team is as well. You're a part of the brand. That's not always the case. And I think that that's really interesting that you get to bring yourself into it and also bring your readers into the brand more than you might see in a different industry. Does that feel accurate in terms of particularly of you're talking on social and engaging on social?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm right in the thick of it, and I edit a few titles, and I am not afraid to recommend things that aren't ours to other people. If, there's a new Junji Ito book from Viz, I'm going to talk about that because that's what I love. And it's like, well, maybe somebody else will also like that and see, oh, what else do they have going on? But, I think, I've worked agency life, and I see there was sometimes this big disconnect between the people who were making the content and, oh gosh, how do I say this? The people who were making the content didn't have a connection to the product. They didn't have that kind of viewpoint. A lot of it was just, marketing teams going in and hiring agencies and farming it all out. And there wasn't that connection. There wasn't the firsthand knowledge. And I think that shows, and it can be disingenuous and it can feel preachy. I love having, being able to do this and be a part of it. And I think that if we were a bigger team, it might not be as authentic. I might get more sleep, but it might not be as authentic.
Well, if you figure out how to get more sleep, please share those tips with me because what's that? 2020. It's not existent. That's actually a great kind of segue and kind of where I want to take things to round out our conversation here. You talked about, you did have some experience in agency, I have too, and there was a disconnect. You described it, a lack of authenticity. You don't have that problem, right? Or that challenge necessarily with Legendary Comics. And it's something that you've cultivated in your career there too. So I go back to the comics fan base is one of the original and the most vocal, right? And influential kind of brand advocacy groups. Where do you think other brands and companies can learn from this? And maybe even adopt themselves, regardless of their vertical. Do you think authenticity is something that we should all be embracing, regardless of our brand?
I think if it fits your brand, I think there are some big juggernauts, like the 3M where it would just seem weird. But I think if you can inject that personality, if you can inject that authenticity and your genuine love and enthusiasm for what you're working on, I say do it. It's not, so many people are just trying to be cool, and I'm not cool, and I'm okay with that. And I want that to be reflected, that I'm doing this not just because it's a job and it's a paycheck, but because I genuinely love it. And, and I hope that some of that love that I put out there kind of is felt and is like, oh, you know what? This is kind of rad. This is kind of awesome. I should take a look at this too. And I don't know. It's fun and it's weird and I know it's very unique, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, I know you have a real passion for the space, and you always have. And again, just to kind of close out the conversation here, where does passion play in terms of creating connection with your fans, with your consumers, with your customer? We have lots of different words. Where does passion lie in that pursuit?
I think the passion for it is really important. It's, you and I both know we work in publishing. It's not, when people used to ask me about it, I would be like, well, do you like ramen? Because, we're not the best paying industry. And, if you do it because you love it, not because you want to be a millionaire, because that's probably not going to happen. But I think the passion is really important. I think it's important with fans. I think it's important with talent. I've been on both sides of the talent. I've been a freelancer and I've been a company person, and knowing that and being able to genuinely, be concerned and talk about and care about the people you work with, I think is really important. We've both built up these relationships years where we can call someone who would be otherwise out of our reach and ask for hey, can you do a cover? And they'll say yes, because it's us, because they know us, because they know our passion for it. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And I know not everyone has that luxury. It is a privilege and it is a luxury to be able to do that, but it's also a lot of hard work. It's a lot of sacrifice. It's a lot of sleepless nights. It's a lot of spinning plates. But I think when you really believe in something and you really know what you're doing is important and that it will have a greater impact beyond just what you do, it makes it a lot easier and it makes it feel a lot more genuine.
Do you think that brands who maybe have lost their passion, do you think that they can maybe find their way back to it through their fans or consumers or customers?
I do. I think, it's so funny. I look at something like The Mandalorian on Star Wars and the Star Wars universe, and by going small, they've made it feel big again, and they've embraced that, and I love that. It's not about giant explosions. It's about small storytelling that is relatable and fun. But I do think it's possible for brands to see that. I think sometimes it takes a step back. You have to take a step back and look at it. And I think it's talking to your fans and the people who support you, seeing what they want, or if they're unhappy, why they're unhappy. I think, there's also, we're not going to be able to fix everything and make everyone happy, but it's also sometimes it's just listening. Sometimes it's going for the person who maybe doesn't have the degree, but has, 10 years of experience in the space and a love for it. I've seen a lot in agencies and big companies, you get lost in like, who has the MBA and who has this? How about who has a passion for it? Who loves this? Who can represent your brand and share their enthusiasm, with the rest of the world in a way that will resonate? I think there's a lot there, and hopefully we will see some of that change.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I love that too. I think I'll tell you, and all these conversations I have are so interesting. And the common denominator I keep coming back to is that listen, listen to your fan. We have a lot of different words for who kind of is on the other end of this relationship. But let's just use the word fan or consumer or customer. Mm-hmm. It's the universal thing here is listening to them to help kind of serve as a compass for you too. So Jann, I could talk to you about this industry forever, and I may ask you to come back and revisit this conversation too, because I love it so much. And I think it's a really interesting space to watch. Well before this last year, it's always been such a dynamic space. And you've been such a trailblazer in it too. So thank you so much for your time and your insights and giving us a little bit of your knowledge and view into your world and Legendary Comics as well.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been great. Anytime.
Thanks.